Hey folks, welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. So on Sunday, I put a call out for some questions, asking you guys to submit questions that I could answer for you in the form of a Q&A. So I posted that in the community tab of my channel, which I think I'm going to be using a lot more these days to talk to you guys and to get some feedback from you about what you want to see on the channel. So there's that. So a few of you responded, and a couple of you said that you wanted to talk about interceptions in the chart. So I think it was V. Let me just check my phone to see who was asking about it. So I think it was V and the True 32 who were both asking about interceptions and how they work. All right, so what are interceptions, first of all? So intercepted signs is what it is. So certain houses in the chart are going to take up more than 30 degrees. And within that house, the house that takes up more than 30 degrees, that house will engulf or contain an entire sign within it. To use my own chart, my first house, my ascendant is 25 degrees of Aquarius, and the whole of Pisces is contained, the whole of the sign of Pisces is contained within my first house, and the second house of my chart begins at 2 degrees of Aries. So the whole of Pisces is contained within my first house, and that's an example of what an intercepted sign is. So to sort of understand intercepted signs and how they come about, we have to kind of backtrack a bit to talk about house systems, because the interception issue only arises in certain contexts depending on what house system you use. So if you use equal houses, the ascendant, let's say my ascendant would be 25 degrees of Aquarius, and that would open the first house. And the second house would be 25 Pisces. The third house would be 25 Aries. So that is how it would be if you're using equal houses and you omit this business of having a house that has more than 30 degrees. Similarly, if you're using whole sign houses, the ascendant sign, the sign that the ascendant is in, constitutes the first house. From a whole sign house perspective, my entire first house would be the sign of Aquarius from 0 to 29 degrees. Okay, so certain house systems do not allow for this business of interceptions. Interceptions happen when we're using a quadrant house system like Placidus or Coke, right? And I use, in my practice, I use Placidus or Coke, mostly Coke, for client work, right? So we have to situate the interceptions issue in terms of what house system we're using. It doesn't apply in all instances. Now, house systems are somewhat artificial constructs in the sense that you don't look in the sky and say, oh, there's a second house, there's a third house. Based on your location, the MC-IC axis and the ascendant-descendant axis are formed, and we can work that out. But the intermediary houses, we need a system to calculate those, and people had different ways of doing that. But certainly, based on your location and time of birth, all of that, we can calculate with precision the cusp of the 10th and the 4th house and the 1st and the 7th houses. So that's how that works. So in terms of interceptions, I'm going to give you what I have noticed about them. And what I have noticed is that a planet in an intercepted sign does not behave any differently. So I think that, let's see, I think it was the True 32 who was saying here that they have Pisces rising and Aries, the whole of the sign of Aries is contained in their first house, and they have Mercury and the Sun in Aries, but Aries is intercepted in the first house. So that Mercury in Aries, that Sun in Aries, is still going to behave like the Sun and Mercury in Aries. there's no sort of difference there. It's still going to behave the same way. So it doesn't matter that the sign in the house is intercepted. Once a planet is in that sign, it's going to behave no differently than if the sign were not intercepted. Okay, so that Aries sun is going to behave the same across the board. There's no difference in how the planets are going to be operating. There is a school of thought which says that intercepted signs within houses there's a kind of challenge in expressing the energy. I haven't noticed that. I think, obviously signs are activated by the planets within them. So if you have no planets, like me, I have no planets in Pisces, even though Pisces is intercepted in my first house. There are no planets there. So Pisces is not really a dominant tone for me. It's not something that, as a kind of sign energy, it's not coloring a lot of my psychological motivation. So there are no planets in Pisces. It hasn't been my observation that if a person has planets in a sign that's intercepted, that the person has an issue expressing the planet in the sign. That's not what I've noticed at all. That's not what I've seen at all in my practice. So I think sometimes we have to really look at things from the perspective of what have I noticed, and not to just accept whatever is passed down without testing it for yourself. The significant thing from an interpretive standpoint with interceptions is that if a house takes up more than 30 degrees, it means that there are going to be two pairs of houses in the chart which have the same signs on them. So to use my chart as an example, I have Pisces intercepted in the first house, and my fourth house cusp, my IC, is at 4 degrees of Gemini, and my fifth house cusp begins at 29 degrees of Gemini. So we have the fourth house and the fifth house with Gemini on them, on the cusp. Similarly, in the opposite side of the chart, my 10th house is opening at 4 degrees of Sagittarius, and my 11th house is also opening in Sagittarius at 29 degrees. So what this means, so what interceptions do, is that they focalize a particular planet now in terms of rulership. So it means that with Gemini on my 4th house cusp and 5th house cusp, it means that Mercury in my chart is governing or ruling 2 houses, my 4th house and my 5th house. So Mercury has rulership and is governing not just 1 house in my chart, but 2 houses. Similarly, Jupiter in my chart is going to be governing my 10th house and my 11th house, because both those houses have Sagittarius on the house cusp. So that's what interceptions do. They give planets in the chart a wider domain of influence in terms of the houses that they rule, and that's something that I want to pay attention to, or do pay attention to, when I'm looking at charts. So if a planet is having jurisdiction over more than 1 house, we want to pay attention to that. It means that the planet has a wider sphere of influence. Okay, so that's what is important. So to use the True 32's example of Aries being intercepted in house 1, so that person has Aries intercepted in the first house. So it means that if Aries is intercepted, that means that Aries is not on any house cusp, and therefore Mars does not rule any houses, well, certainly any Aries houses. We could have something in Scorpio, and Mars does rule Scorpio in terms of the traditional rulership there. So Mars is not going to rule any houses in terms of the Aries tone of that Mars, because Aries is not on any house cusp. So that's what is important to focus on. What signs are duplicated, and therefore which planets have a wider sphere of influence, because that sign is now on 2 house cusps instead of 1. So V was saying that her 6th house opens at 17 degrees of Scorpio, and her 7th house opens at 1 degree of Capricorn. So it means that the whole of Sagittarius is contained within the 6th house. And she was wondering, well, you know, Jupiter is now in Sagittarius, and Sagittarius isn't on any house cusp. So where is her luck this year? She's asking. So if Jupiter is in Sag and you have Sag in your 6th house, then it means that Jupiter is in your 6th house. By transit, that Jupiter is traversing your 6th house. That's what that means. So your 6th house is still being focalized in terms of what Jupiter is doing there by transit now in Sagittarius. But a word on that, you know, in terms of this question of luck, that you know by now that I'm very careful about, you know, reducing Jupiter to this lucky influence, in the sense that what Jupiter does in a house by transit is allow us to expand and improve the area, you know, if we're ready for that. It allows us to bring expansion and improvement, and also to flesh out more of a long-term focus for how we're going to be approaching the affairs of that house. So as an example, I had a client who, with Jupiter in Scorpio going through his 4th house, he actually lost his apartment. But that loss of the apartment, because he could no longer afford the rent, constituted an improvement for him, because 1, he was able to move in with his family and to save that money in the meantime, and also that he did not have to do this huge commute in terms of taking his kids to school, because he's no longer living in that location. So there's an improvement there, but that improvement sort of came through a loss. I have to give up my apartment. And I always stress that Jupiter transits, in terms of their expanding influence, they often demand that we leave something behind for us to go into new territory. And sometimes that going into new territory, that giving up of something, may not always feel characteristically lucky or positive. So that's also how Jupiter works. And in keeping with Jupiter, you're being asked to have faith and to have an attitude of trust that even though this event looks like it is a loss or something unlucky, you have to trust that Jupiter is delivering to you through that vehicle some kind of improvement down the line, even though you may not be able to see it. So I'm just saying that we have to be mindful about how we are reducing Jupiter to just this business of luck. Jupiter is about moving you beyond the sphere and the parameters that you have been in before. Under a Jupiter transit to my sun, I had a very difficult termination of a relationship. But, you know, that transit sort of allowed me to give it an essential meaning, that I was moving beyond, expanding into territory for myself personally, that this relationship could not really, as long as it was in my life, I wouldn't be able to go forward into new territory. And that has been quite true. That happened a few years ago, and here I am today. And I know for sure that the essential meaning of the time is captured by that Jupiter transit there. So I'm just saying to you that be mindful about that. But also, if Jupiter is in Sag and Sagittarius is contained within your 6th house, Sagittarius is intercepted, in terms of assessing the impact of that Jupiter transit, you're going to want to look at the aspects that Jupiter is making as well. It's not only about the house that Jupiter is transiting or going through, it's about what aspects is transiting Jupiter making to other planets and points in your chart as well. So in terms of looking at that, you can assess the transits to other planets that Jupiter is making or doing, for you to have a fuller sense of what the Jupiter transit means for you beyond just the house placement. But so interceptions are not a problem. They have not come up in my practice as being fundamentally problematic in terms of the expression of that sign. Houses are artificial constructs in the sense that we have to come up with a system of dividing the chart. So if you use equal houses or whole sign houses, you're not going to have that interception issue, okay? And that will be just irrelevant. But in terms of just how interceptions function, it's very, very useful in terms of quadrant-based houses like Placidus or Coke. It's useful to understand that because a sign is intercepted, and because as a consequence of that, we now have two pairs of houses with the same sign on the cusp, it's useful to understand how a ruling planet, like in my case Mercury, is governing both my 4th and 5th houses, Jupiter governing my 10th and 11th houses. It's very useful to have that a perspective to see, okay, fine, this planet has domain or has jurisdiction over more than one house in my chart and will be quite important. So Mercury has quite a wide field of influence in my chart, 4th and 5th houses, and Jupiter as well in terms of governing my 10th and 11th houses. So that's what I would pay more attention to. I have not seen personally where people are any more challenged to express the energy of the sign. So if you have the sun, like I think it was a True 32 who had the sun in Aries, but Aries is contained or engulfed or intercepted in the 1st house, it's not going to be a question of, oh, I'm challenged to express Aries energy or my sun in Aries or Mercury in Aries because of the fact that Aries is intercepted. That's not, I do not see that at all. I'm being honest. But if I see otherwise, I will update my views. But for now, practically, a planet does not behave differently in an intercepted sign. All right, folks. So those are a few things to think about in terms of intercepted signs. Hope it was helpful. Thanks for watching, and until next time, talk soon. Bye.